We're now ready to begin blocking in the animation. And in this lesson, we'll create the initial pose. Before we get started, let's check for a few things. We should first make sure we have our thumbnails handy so we can refer back to them if and when we need to. We should also make sure that our keying mode is set to key character key set. That way, we can make sure that all controls are going to be locked down by a keyframe. Yes, that means that we have several keyframes that we may need to go back and clean up. But I find that the polish pass goes by much faster if we have made sure at this stage that all of our extremes are locked down. That way we can avoid floaty controls when we're ready to switch our interpolation to spline. Also, another good idea, actually a great idea, is to check our rotate order on the controls that will rotate quite a bit. That's our arm controls, the center of gravity, the torso, the legs. Because by changing our rotate order to something more suitable for our animation, we can prevent gimbal lock as much as possible. So to give you an idea of the rotate order I'm using for the controls here that I've just pointed out, we can go ahead and select the left arm and press Ctrl K to get to its kinematic properties. So here it is, X, Z, Y. So first, I find that staying away from X, Y, Z, which is the default, is best for complicated animations where there's going to be a lot of rotation. Because with X, Y, Z, again, we are prone to run into gimbal lock issues where our controls start to flip out. And it really depends on what you're animating. If you're animating something simple, you may stick with X, Y, Z. You may have no issues. But for something like this, I found that the rotate order definitely needed to change. Now, when you're choosing a rotate order, again, it depends on what you're animating. Let's take a closer look at what we get with X, Z, Y. So I'll go ahead and close out the property page and we'll press the C key to grab our rotate manipulator. From there, let's right click and choose add mode, which shows us the true rotate order of this object. Shows us what axis is going to be modified. So when we start to move in the X axis, you can see that nothing else moves. The other constraint rings stay put, which is great because we don't lose control in any other axis. When we start to move in the Z axis, you can see that it starts to drive the X, and eventually we will run into gimbal lock where the X and Y overlap and we lose control in one axis. But I'm not too concerned with this, and you'll learn why shortly. Now when we start to move in the Y axis, you can see it's going to drive all three axes, so that's great. Now, here's why I'm not concerned with what happens when we tweak the Z-axis. With this rotate order, if we were to right-click and go back to local mode, notice we can pose this control however we'd like. When we right-click and go back to add mode, you can see that we still have really decent rotation here. Beautiful. So essentially how this works, if I were to go ahead and undo back to bring the wrist back, and right-click and go back to local mode, we'll press Ctrl K again, and see that with the X-axis, that's going to be driven by Z and Y. And Z will drive X, but Y is going to drive all three. So that's essentially how that works. So you'd want to go ahead and choose what's best for your needs. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and now close this out. What I'll do next is turn on auto key. I'm not going to worry about setting our playback to real time, and we'll learn why in the next lesson. Essentially, we shouldn't concern ourselves with timing just yet, but let's go ahead and talk about that in the next lesson when we create our next pose. All right, so let's go ahead and start to pose the character. We know that his left foot should be resting on this rock. If you're having trouble kind of seeing the geometry, especially at the back here, where there's a lot of shading going on, you could always go to your display type menu at the top and switch this to headlight. All right, so now we can go ahead and grab our leg control. And on frame 1 here, let's go ahead and bring that over and rotate it so it's resting right here on this rock. All right, beautiful. So from there, we can go ahead and grab our center of gravity, kind of move that over to keep the character balanced. Very fun. And speaking of fun, we should always have fun with the poses that we create. And in order to do so, we need to get into our character's mind and and ask what type of attitude would they have. So we know this wolf character should be on high alert, but it really doesn't bother him too much because he's more of a cool guy, but still tough. Let's go ahead and bend his upper torso down with the chest control. We'll also add a slight bend with the back control so we can get some really nice curvature in the back. A good solid line of action. Great. Now thinking about his left arm, his forearm's going to rest on his thigh. Let's go ahead and take the chest control and kind of twist it over in that direction so that when he leans his arm, we have a natural looking pose. Great. Thinking about balance here, we could always take his right foot and kind of drag that back a bit more. Beautiful. For his hips, we don't ever want to forget about that. We should make sure that they're kind of opened up considering the position of the legs, so they're not stressed. The character is going to be relaxed as much as possible. It's another rule I like to keep in mind. So now we can go ahead and take his left arm. We could go ahead and drag that around. Let's go ahead and grab his wrist and go ahead and twist that around. Bring that down and over. Beautiful. And we'll also go ahead and rotate it down. We need to fix that left elbow. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and grab that control and just swing that around. Great. I'll go ahead and take his center of gravity and let's go ahead and bring him down. This pose is really starting to come together, which is really exciting. Great. Let's go ahead and grab his clavicle. Let's go ahead and just bring that down a bit. And now we can start to tweak his left arm a bit more, making sure that forearm rests on his thigh. Okay, so from there, we can go ahead and grab the chest and kind of rotate that down a bit more. Do the same thing for the back control. I'll go ahead and take his left arm, just bring that over a bit more. Should make sure that the forearm is what's resting on his thigh there. Then we could go ahead and kind of bring the wrist down a bit. Okay, great. It looks like the chest is twisted up a bit too much. I'll go ahead and just rotate it in the opposite direction just slightly to fix the pose there. We can go ahead and grab the center of gravity, just kind of drag him back just a bit more for balance. Okay, great. So I'm liking where this is going. We want to make sure that we pose that wrist in a way where it really feels natural. I'll slide that forearm over. All right, great. Now for the head, let's go ahead and start by rotating the neck up. And then we'll pose the head in a way where the character seems to be focused on what's happening, not necessarily right in front of him, but we'll add a slight tilt to the head for interest, and we'll have him look a little bit more to his left, just so it seems like he's really focused. We don't want to have him point on and look at the camera. That gets very cliche and it's very unnatural. So we just want to think about ways we can get as creative as possible. Just want to work on his balance a bit, maybe bring in his center of gravity back a bit more. Great. I'll go ahead and take the elbow and just kind of drag that back a bit more as well. Now this is really starting to come together. Beautiful stuff. For the right arm, let's go ahead and drop that down. And we always want to think about weight and gravity. We want to make sure we pose this in a very natural way so it looks as if gravity is affecting this arm. All right, great. So this is really exciting. And since that arm has been brought down, let's go ahead and grab that right clavicle and just drag that down a bit as well. Now, thinking about his right foot, I'm going to just drag that over closer to a center for balance. And let's go ahead and rotate the ankle out for a more natural pose. The foot is not going to point straight forward. Again, that's not a believable pose at all because naturally our feet are are going to kind of point out either that or in, but never straight forward. By pointing them straight forward, it's almost as if the feet are kind of locked down by some force. So we don't want that to happen. As we're posing this, let's think about what's happening in our shot camera. So we're getting some really nice results from that view. So that's really exciting. And you can see here that we're just focused on the main body right now. Once we're satisfied with that, then we could start to think about the fingers. So we can go in and start to curl them in. I'll start by grabbing the pinky all the way to the index, and we'll just go ahead and rotate them in. And then we can go ahead and add a slight offset just for a more natural hand position. So you definitely want to break that up. And then we can go in and start to adjust the mid and end sections for natural curl. So we'll just go through and do that for each finger. And since the hands are less noticeable, that means we can pose them a bit faster and not necessarily have to worry about the pose too much, but we should still think about the pose nevertheless, just making sure that it's as natural as possible, but at the same time, we really are concerned with what's most noticeable. So as long as the hands appear to be at a really nice position here, then we can get away with not necessarily having to polish them too much, because the audience is going to be concerned with the rest of the body. Yes, they'll look at the hands, but not as much as they would, let's say, the character's head, where we focus the most, right here at the eyes. And then what happens in the torso, the legs, and such. Now, if we had a close-up where the hands were in focus, well, then we'd have to put more effort in posing them and timing them just right. All right, so I'll go in and start to rotate the other sections here. I'll go ahead and grab, again, the index to the pinky. We'll go ahead and rotate those in first. And once we're finished with those, we can then go ahead and move on to the thumb. But we'll pose this hand the same way, and that's essentially going to be it for this initial pose. So we'll just go in and kind of rotate the mid and end sections of each finger. Always being mindful of our shot camera. And then we'll worry about the thumb. And if you're struggling to pose your character's hand, just refer to your hand. You have reference right there. I'll go ahead and take the thumb and kind of curl that in, something a bit more natural. Go ahead and rotate the mid and end sections in. Just kind of pose this in a way where it feels nice and loose. And there we have it. So there is our first pose. It looks really fun. All right, so from here, we can go ahead and stop the lesson. And in the next lesson, we're ready to create our next extreme.